I wanted to get into the experiences that Anawaya described in the Trail of Tears, because that seems to be a kind of common theme in a lot of the clients that you have, that there's this great trauma that today people are trying to work through that relates to some past injustice. So with Anawaya, that injustice was the Trail of Tears. So you want to just explain what the Trail of Tears was?
Sure. It was the removal of the Southeastern Native Americans. And basically, they were forced off their lands. And when I was learning about the Trail of Tears in school, I never heard it from this type of firsthand perspective before, because it was horrific. It was more like genocide. I asked Anawaya, why did the white man do this? And he said, well, he understood that the white man, their culture had been stolen from them so long ago, and they didn't understand that they used to be like pagans and witches and dance among fairies, and they had such a beautiful culture that was connected to the earth, but that culture was stolen from them. And then the white man basically forgot who they were. And it was interesting because other clients and him also explained that a lot of the white men were kind of the first early slaves. And it all kind of dawned on me. Basically, they were explaining that we're all in this together. You could point fingers at one group, but really we're all recycled. We're all like everybody. We all play the good roles and the bad roles. And it all kind of equals into our soul.
You're listening to Exopolitics Today with Dr. Michael Salla, your source for the uncensored truth regarding the human, extraterrestrial, global, and political agenda. Click the like button and subscribe to this channel. And now, here's Dr. Michael Salla.
Well, it's my great pleasure to welcome Sarah Breskman Cosme back to Exopolitics Today. Welcome, Sarah.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, I think there might be a few people that don't know what QHHT is. So you want to explain what that is and how long you've been doing that for?
Sure. Basically, QHHT is quantum healing hypnosis technique, and it was developed by the late Dolores Cannon. And basically, all it really is a focusing inwards, where you take the person to the very deepest level of trance and you regress them, then you access their higher consciousness. And in that way, you can ask all kinds of questions about who they really are, their true purpose, and they can even heal themselves. And that's the method that I use to get my information. Just like Dolores Cannon used, I find that this method is really amazing. Before getting into Dolores Cannon's work, I used to do Dr. Brian Weiss's method, which is also fantastic. But I found for what I do that Dolores Cannon's method works the best. I became a master hypnotist and did past life regression since 2009. But it wasn't until 2017 that I really got into quantum healing hypnosis technique.
So in the quantum healing hypnosis technique, you typically take people back to some past life and you ask them a lot of questions, and you're communicating then with the personality from that time, but you also communicate with the higher self. So can you just explain,
Right.
Well, what's the difference when you communicate when you're put a person under and you're communicating with them? What's the difference between when you're communicating with their personality from a prior life and their higher self?
So basically, you can communicate with the personality of that past life, but it's even deeper and more clear when you can communicate with the higher self. The higher self within each person is the same. It's universal consciousness. So you just access that universal field of wisdom, basically, and you can find out anything, because deep down in every single person, you reach the same place, and it's everything. And hypnosis is just, it's used by investigators to find out things about a crime sometimes. Sometimes they bring somebody that saw a crime back and they regress them back to the scene of the crime, and the person can find out what the license plate was and how the crime happened. So it's just like that. It's regressing somebody back all the way back to another lifetime. And then even back before that sometimes is the case often.
Well, I remember reading some of Dolores Cannon's books, which I thought were fabulous. I did come across Dolores at some of the conferences in the early 2000s, but never actually got to meet her, and I regret that because I think her books are fabulous. And I only just in the last few years started to read her work, and it has a lot of depth and there's a lot of really good information there. I know she developed a technique for being able to kind of like filter out the noise, if you like, where a person maybe is bringing in their own conscious beliefs or subconscious things to kind of skew the data. So what do you do to kind of like ensure that the information you're getting from a person is actually coming from a past life as opposed to, some subconscious desire or some manipulative agenda?
Oh, that's such a good question. I mean, you really have to check for either false memory, or you have to check if it's the conscious mind. The conscious mind and the higher consciousness sound completely different. You can tell the higher consciousness has a way about it. It's very loving. It knows everything. The conscious mind or any interference is oftentimes somewhat mean. The higher self, the higher consciousness would never be mean. It sees everything from a very high perspective. And it's, in a sense, it's everyone just from a different perspective. But the way I go about getting my information is sort of different. I get a bunch of people who don't know one another or know what I'm working on, and I'll basically research through their memories. And if I get consistency and I know they don't know anything about this, then I feel like I can trust it.
That's great. So I wonder if you've come across or know of cases of people that have gone through some kind of military grade or some kind of like MK Ultra type trauma-based mind control, where there are these layers that are introduced into the person's subconscious by a third party. Have you come across that? How do you deal with a person who may have been subjected to that kind of thing but wants to learn about their prior lives or even things that they've done in this life that they don't remember?
Well, honestly, it's not much of a shock to them because the subconscious is trying to get them to remember these memories little by little. And they might have a dream where they might remember something like being on Mars or something like that, or being part of a program where they take these people and they're almost like warriors, and they use this, I mean, I know it sounds crazy, but like mind control, and then they bring them back and they seem to be able to regress the person back into a body. And I know that sounds totally crazy, but people will kind of have these clues if they're part of this program, which I know it sounds really weird, but it seems like there's a lot of people that have memories of this.
Well, I've gotten to work with a few people since around 2014 who claim to have been part of these 20 and back programs where they are having their memories wiped after they've done these classified missions, and they struggle to recall what happened. I mean, they have the like the symptoms of stress, traumatic stress syndrome. So they have the symptoms that something happened, but they don't have the memories. And so they're always asking me, how do you kind of get that back? And so what advice would you give to someone who's been through some kind of program like that?
Well, honestly, the subconscious will work with you. So it will give you little by little these glimpses or these memories in the dream. And it knows, it's almost like the higher self is you. So it knows exactly what you need and when, and it knows when you're ready to start processing these things. I'd say if you're all of a sudden starting to have a lot of these memories, or something's triggering you and you really feel it deeply, then it might be the time to go explore. But I wouldn't say it would be great to just, go and do something like this if you weren't ready for it. And you would know you were ready because you would start getting these glimpses.
In terms of clients, I mean, who do you typically get? I mean, is it people that are like suffering some kind of stress and they want to get to the bottom of it, or they're showing symptoms of some kind of unresolved trauma that they can't quite work through and they come to you? Or is it people that are just doing it out of curiosity?
You know, most of my clients come to me as a last resort. I'm their last resort. They usually come to me because they have some serious illness or some issue in their body, like cancer or something like that, because it's very easy to heal yourself when you're really focusing deeply inwards. And the body is a miraculous machine. But when we really focus inwards, we can find out what message the body is sending us. And really, we've never been taught how to use our bodies. Our bodies send us messages through illnesses or issues, and we've never been taught that we're supposed to actually listen to our body, that our body's actually helping us. And the body is so literal in its messages with us. So if it's something with our eyes, it usually means something you don't want to see, or ears, hearing, and, feet, stability. It's so literal, and it's just a message. The body's always on your side. And it's too bad we didn't learn this from a young age, that we need to use these messages and then try to listen to what they're saying. Just like when you've been a part of a program and all of a sudden the subconscious starts to give you these little dreams, it means it's time to start remembering these things.
I remember reading Carolyn Miss's book, Anatomy of the Spirit, about 20 years ago, and she essentially said the same thing, that you got to listen
really?
to the body, you got to communicate with the illness, with the disease, and it will share information to that person. So it sounds what you're doing is very, very similar to that.
Yeah, and illnesses and issues that person has in their body, a lot of times they carry different wisdom, and sometimes they activate your DNA. So not, having an illness or if you get sick is not bad. It's not a bad thing if you understand to kind of accept it and look at it in a different perspective. This is a teaching tool, basically.
Yeah, that's exactly what I remember her saying, that it's like it's something to communicate with. It's a teaching tool, and to just that we need to change our perspective on illness and disease. Well, I wanted to start talking about your latest book. It just came out in December of last year, The Hypnotists Journey from the Trail to the Stars. So what inspired you to write that book?
Well, I just love what I do because I love uncovering all this information. I feel like I'm the universe gossip queen. I don't like regular gossip, but I like uncovering all these secrets about history and everything like that, because it's all, somewhat new to me. I wasn't into any of this stuff. So I had finished my Hypnotist Journey to the Secrets of the Sphinx, and I was just ready for something new. And right before this third book started, I had this client come in, and he remembered being an extraterrestrial in this different, different universe. And he used to collect different samples from different planets and realms to see if you could spark life in these different samples, because what they would do is that they would focus their consciousness in the samples. And if it sparked a reaction, they could support life on this planet. So I asked his higher consciousness, why did you show him that life? And they said, to understand the energetics of a human, because he doesn't understand that humans were built to have their emotions be the gateway through the universe, and you can use your emotions to manifest things. And he's not utilizing this because he was part of the group that designed the human. So we want him to understand how to use the human genetics. And so they were telling him, when you have a strong emotion, no matter what kind of emotion, it always opens up portals. And to visualize this portal opening and to pull through visualization what it was that you wanted. And in his case, he wanted to be writing, and he just wasn't doing anything. And his higher consciousness was pretty mad at him and wanted him to start, doing these things. And they wanted him to get started by understanding how to use his emotions to get the ball rolling. So afterwards, I thought, well, that was pretty interesting. I'm going to try this for myself. And, the one thing I always want is I want to know more. I'm just so curious about everything. It's so fun to learn these things. So I just, put myself into a state of gratitude, because for me, that's the easiest way to feel something really strongly and feel good. And I know that raises your vibration. So I felt really good and I felt full of gratitude. And then I visualized like a new subject, a new information. And my eyes were still closed and my phone pinged. And that might not sound weird or anything like that, but my phone was set to silent. And then I thought, how did my phone ping? I didn't even think, oh, the universe just granted my, wish, I didn't think that. I thought, why did my phone ping when it's set to silent? And then I looked at it, and it was this woman named Les, and she had messaged me on Facebook Messenger, but that's even impossible because normally you can't message me. You have to approve the new message. So it didn't make any sense. And it said, hi, my name is Les. You're going to think I'm crazy, but I had this weird urge to message you right now, and I don't know why. And I know you think I'm so weird, and I'm sorry, but I had to message you. So, I know after doing this work for so long that there are no coincidences. So I just, talked back with her, and I asked her if she had ever done hypnosis. And I told her a little bit about what I had just done, and she just pinged me. So I really didn't think it was coincidence. Would she be willing to do a session with me? And she said, sure. She didn't really know. She'd never been hypnotized before. And so here she comes. She's a Caucasian woman, about 31, I think. And she comes in for a session. And as soon as I get her deep under hypnosis, this other sounding voice appeared. And through Les, it was still her voice, but it sounded masculine and it had an accent. It said, my name is Anawaya. I'm the one who contacted you. I contacted you because I've been watching you in order to see if you could gain our trust. And now that you have, I'm ready to tell our story now, because our story is so important. And I thought, oh my gosh, what is happening right now? I've heard stuff like this. I've seen stuff like this before, but they were watching me. I just felt like, okay. So I asked Anawaya, tell me a little bit about yourself. And he was describing that he was a parallel life, but also you could consider it a past life of Les's. And he didn't say I am a Native American, but he was a Native American, and he was walking the Trail of Tears. And he just described this whole story of his own firsthand perspective, which was just, I'd never heard a story like this before. And so after our first session, which we didn't really get into the whole story, we got a little, I asked Les if she had ever heard of Anawaya before, and she said, yes, that was her imaginary friend when she was younger. And so she realized that he wasn't imaginary, that he was just coming to check on her when she was younger, and then I learned that sometimes imaginary friends are not imaginary at all. They're actually different versions of you coming to check on you, which was very interesting. So go ahead.
I was going to just get you to elaborate on something you said, which I thought was very interesting. You talked about this Anawaya and whether it was a parallel life or whether it was a past life. Now, that's a really interesting question. I mean, that life that Anawaya lived as an Indian during that Trail of Tears era, is it, in truth, is it a parallel life that our mind just kind of thinks of these things that's having happened in the past because that's how we conceptualize and work, but in reality, right, it's happening now. That is happening right now. In a parallel
it's happening.
Reality.
I know it's hard to grasp, but it's happening right now. It's because time doesn't exist in the rest of the universe. Anawaya explained that he was very much alive. And he was doing this meditation that he had learned through other lifetimes. And that was how he was able to do it. And he would make his body very still and focus his consciousness through almost like a telephone call to this other parallel version of himself. But he also was so spiritually, I guess you could say spiritually advanced, that he could see his whole life in full. And it's amazing that he could see that, yet also explain that he was very much alive and go even through his death.
Yeah, I thought it was very interesting in the book how you described unaware, how he was able to connect with the earth and the sun, that this was something that a lot of the Native Americans did at the time. So you want to explain how he did that?
Sure. I believe that this is one of the reasons why it was so important for him and also this collective to share the story now, because the earth consciousness is raising right now. The consciousness of the earth is growing stronger and stronger. And we're supposed to understand how to reconnect with the earth and communicate back with the earth. And he was describing it, and so were many of my other clients, that right now it's important to really develop your relationship back with the earth and to understand that the earth is us. Everything's symbolic on this 3D reality. And the earth is also us. It represents us and is us, our mother and everything. But we can connect with the earth and with nature using subtle layers of energy. If you go out into nature and you really allow the nature's intelligence to go almost like through your body, through your skin, you can learn new ways of communicating with this intelligence. That's what we're supposed to do. We're really not utilizing this really powerful intelligence that's, begging us to do this, basically.
So communing with the earth was very important with the Native Americans, and we can guess that from the relationship they had with the animals and the forests and the fish and the ocean, the sea, lakes and so forth, but also with the sun. And I thought that was very interesting because I know the ancient civilizations connected with the sun, and we actually, in our first interview, we talked about Lemuria and how sun worship was such an important part of that. So you want to kind of elaborate on that sun connection?
Right. It was really important to express how the sun is a portal, and the information is pumped through the sun. It goes through the unfiltered eyes and straight into the pineal gland, and it downloads humanity with tons of information constantly. And that's why one of my clients came in, and I put this in the book because I thought it was so important that they couldn't lose weight. And the reason was because they never went outside without their sunglasses. It was so contacts. It was so interesting just how important it is to connect with the sun, that all this information is coming to us through that portal in the sun. And it was amazing how the Native Americans and other indigenous tribes understood that it really helped power them almost too. It's almost like they would open their third eye and get this information from the sun. And all different ancient cultures really understood the power and the connection of the sun with other realms and other information, that it was almost like a connection, so to speak. Because the human body is like, it's really interesting when, not to get too off track, but even like a gray extraterrestrial, when they're flying their plane, they always have their feet on the ground and their hands kind of on these like imprints of hands, and they always have to have their hands touching and their feet on the ground to connect themselves into a circuit. It's like the human body is so intelligent, and it really helps you connect to this intelligence by touching this, touching the earth, touching these things, touching that equipment, if that makes sense.
Okay, yeah. That ability to kind of touch and feel and develop some kind of symbiotic relationship with whatever it is you're touching or feeling, yeah, that's important. I wanted to kind of get a little bit into the experiences that Unaware described in the Trail of Tears, because that seems to be a kind of common theme in a lot of the clients that you have, that there's this trauma, there's this great trauma that today people are trying to work through that relates to some past injustice. So with Unaware, that injustice was the Trail of Tears. So you want to just explain what the Trail of Tears was?
Sure. It was the removal of the southeastern Native Americans. And basically, they were forced off their lands. And, when I was learning about the Trail of Tears in school, I never heard it from this type of firsthand perspective before, because it was horrific. It was more like genocide. I mean, women were raped, people were murdered, children were murdered. They really seemed to care so little about their lives. And it was just so horrific to hear how they were treated, just so sad. But I asked Anawaya, why did the white man do this? I mean, it's just horrific to hear, it's really difficult. And he said, well, he understood that the white men were part of this group, and the white men were, their culture had been stolen from them so long ago, and they didn't understand that they used to be fair. They used to be like pagans and witches and dance among fairies, and they had such a beautiful culture that was connected to the earth, but that culture was stolen from them. And then the white man basically forgot who they were. And it was interesting because he also, other clients and him also explained that a lot of the white men were kind of the first early slaves. And it all kind of dawned on me. Basically, they were explaining that we're all in this together. You could point fingers at one group, but really we're all recycled. We're all like everybody. We all play the good roles and the bad roles, and it all kind of equals into our soul. But the reason why a lot of people have so much trauma, the higher consciousness was telling me, was that they were thinking that in order to, move this experiment or this consciousness of evolution faster, that you could use trauma to kind of ascend quicker. And the way to use trauma to actually ascend yourself or, move up in consciousness is actually, almost like when you have an illness and you can use that as a blessing to move into a different direction in your life. You can use trauma in the same way. When you understand what its message is and what its purpose is and go really deep within the trauma, it'll lead you to that same place. It'll lead you to joy, which I know, doesn't seem like that would make sense if you follow your trauma deep down, that it would lead to joy. But that's actually the case. If you really go deep into yourself and you find out, the very root cause of why you have trauma, it's actually to lead you to a different place, to lead you to a better place within yourself.
Yeah, in the book, you describe Anawaya's tormentor as this soldier who was kind of like very similar to him in height and body physique and so forth. And this soldier really tormented Anawaya because the soldier had within him this unresolved trauma. And I think it was, correct me if I'm wrong, it may have been that he was a former Atlantean and he had the trauma from the destruction of Atlantis. And even though he and Anawaya were so similar, he saw the similarities and kind of like despised Anawaya for it because Anawaya had something he didn't. So yeah, you want to just kind of elaborate on that kind of situation.
Right. Anawaya described this man with a mustache, and he said, he hates me so much because he sees himself in me, but he doesn't possess the same qualities that I have. And he can't stand that because he could see how Anawaya treated his people so kindly. And this man had never been treated kindly. And Anawaya even tried to point it out to this man, this soldier, that they had similar pasts because Anawaya's family was all murdered when he was younger. And the same with this man with the mustache. So they were so similar. They were even about the same age, but the hatred from this man with the mustache stayed with Anawaya and even showed up into Les's dreams. So Les used to dream about this man with the mustache, and she had no idea why. It was actually from that past life, that residual trauma of this man, because he used to beat Anawaya. He just wanted to feel better. This man with a mustache wanted to feel better, and he thought he could by beating Anawaya, but it never dulled his pain.
So at a certain point in the book, you start talking about the connection between the Native Americans and the Star People, and it is very, very rich. And I was frankly very surprised at how similar the kind of history that you uncovered through your QHHT was to the history that I've been able to uncover using whistleblowers, ancient texts, people who have memories or have contact themselves with extraterrestrials, that they tell a similar story. So I was really kind of amazed at that similarity. And you told me before we began the interview that you don't read UFO, exopolitics literature at all. So the information you have is totally independent, but yet there is a powerful similarity.
That's so confirming. That's great to know, because I don't research other people's information. I only get my information from my own clients. But it was fascinating because, and I'm so glad you had Jen on your show that one time. When I was working with Jen, I asked her to draw the symbol of Lemuria, and I was surprised when it was the 4 directions Native American symbol, or that indigenous symbol of the 4 directions. And I thought, that's really interesting. And then only to come to find out through Anawaya's memories and other memories from other clients that that's because a lot of the Lemurians became Native Americans. So they kind of carry that wisdom, and all these symbols come from the Star People. And a lot of times the Native Americans describe these Star People as being the Pleiadians, because they would call them the 7 sisters. They didn't say Pleiadians, but they called them the 7 sisters. And it was really fascinating that just to see how that knowledge went from the Pleiades down to Lemuria and then to the Native Americans and into our culture. It's really interesting, this interesting cycle.
Mm-hmm. It's very fascinating how the 7 sisters, or the Pleiades, is in the traditions of a lot of Native peoples. I know from the time I spent in Hawaii and working with the indigenous Hawaiians that the Pleiades actually is a very big part of their culture, and that they trace their ancestry and the origin of their gods, the Hawaiian gods, before the Christian religion kind of like came in, that could be traced to the Pleiades. So again, the same origin story, that the Pleiades have this connection to a lot of these kind of indigenous peoples, not only in the Americas, but in places like Hawaii and other Polynesian islands.
It's interesting because some of these people, some of my clients, when they remember being kind of like in a very older, I guess you could call it ancient Hawaiian lifetime, they remember they used to do this special meditation to try to be able to see the 7 sisters. And what they would do was they would pick a point in front of them and they would focus on it, and they would develop their peripheral vision. And eventually they would be able to start to see things just by doing that practice every day. And then the Hawaiians, the ancient Hawaiians, had this really cool meditation technique that they used to like connect with their ancestors. And it was basically they would fill their bellies up all the way, and then they would breathe out like this weird, like, and they would just keep doing that until they would start to focus inwards. It's really interesting, all this ancient history.
Yeah, in the Hawaiian language, I mean, the breath, or aloha, is all about the breath, and so yeah, they definitely use the breath to invoke meaning, and there's a lot of power in the breathing. So yeah, the Hawaiians have that. One of the things that you talked about in your book, which I found really interesting, was you talk about the arrival of these giant humanoids, the original gods, and how they kind of like genetically altered the primitive hominids on Earth at the time to create humans, and that they created those humans as slaves because they wanted them to find the gold. So I just wanted you to kind of elaborate on that, because that has such similarities to the story of the Anunnaki that's been described by people like Zecharia Sitchin and others.
Right. It's so interesting. I mean, that was the story that they were telling me, that there were these like very tall, godlike beings. They weren't humans, and they came because this planet had a lot of gold, and the gold could help them power different devices. I mean, this planet is just full in different resources. And so they just created, slaves out of the humans. And then there was almost like a call throughout the universe, because there were other beings that didn't feel that this should be happening, since humans are the experiment. So there were agreements made, in order to get rid of these people doing this to the humans.
Yes, that has such similarities to the stories in the Sumerian texts about the Anunnaki, how they kind of like did the genetic alterations. And you talked about the other extraterrestrial groups who kind of arrived and were very concerned about that, and kind of like they reached agreements. And again, you kind of see that echoed in ancient texts like the Book of Enoch, where they talked about these councils or these assemblies of they call it the assemblies of angels or evolved beings, but they met to resolve these conflicts. So again, the information you got from the sessions you were doing with your clients is very similar to the information we get in these ancient texts like the Enuma Elish or the Book of Enoch.
That's so interesting. Maybe someday I'll read that book because I keep hearing about it.
Yeah, well, the Sumerian texts constantly talk about these gods meeting in councils or assemblies and resolving their differences that way, which is pretty much what you just described. That these giant extraterrestrials who arrived started to change the local kind of human population, but then other extraterrestrials came in and said, hey, you shouldn't be doing that. This is our long-term genetic experiment. You're interfering. And so they had to kind of meet in this grand assembly to resolve all these conflicts.
Right. It's really fascinating. Like when I have clients look deep into these underground tunnels, sometimes they'll see these bodies in stasis. And I know that sounds like really crazy, but they'll be like on an angle, and there'll be these giant godlike bodies where these beings would come in and use these stasis bodies. That's, sounds crazy, but they would see them under certain things like the Sphinx and under places like that.
You want to elaborate on that, because that's an issue that I'm currently working on with different people that are saying that they're going on these classified missions, military missions, and they're finding these giants in these sarcophagi that are kind of sleeping and being protected by others. So you want to just elaborate on what you've been told by clients?
Right. When I've had multiple clients look down underneath the Sphinx, there's plenty of tunnels down there, and they saw some bodies like in stasis, like giant like bodies, and they're basically almost like like a really advanced version of a humanoid body it comes equipped with all kinds of different abilities that humans don't have. And I ask, why can't these beings just create a body? If they can do anything, why can't they create a body? And apparently it doesn't work like that. They can't just create a body out of the air. They have to come into a body. So I found that interesting, that they would come down and they would use these bodies that were underneath the ground, especially like under the Sphinx, but under the pyramids. The pyramids used to work, but they've been very tampered with. So those bodies are just bones now. They're not still alive. There were plenty of things that were interesting that were under the Sphinx, but when I had my clients look, they were missing. So they're gone.
Okay, so that's an important point to emphasize, that these bodies of giants that are being found all over the world in these stone sarcophagi, that these are actually avatar bodies, that some extraterrestrials would come when they arrive, that if the body is still preserved, then they would just simply transfer their consciousness in and, kind of Zeus wakes up or Poseidon wakes up, and here I am. What's been happening on Earth?
Seriously. Yeah, because these different places had kind of like a power to it, like a generator. So they were keeping them alive with this type of technology. But yet not all, it doesn't seem like all giants were these avatars, because according to my clients, when they were seeding the population, they wanted to try everything for this experiment. So they tried larger humans, and then they tried fish-like humans, just to see what would be the best design for a human. So there were also just large humans.
Mm-hmm. Well, I know one of the things that fascinated me in reading Dolores Cannon's Convoluted Universe was the multiple references. Actually, I think it was her book, The Custodians, where she talked about these extraterrestrial organizations that were kind of monitoring or controlling the long-term evolution on Earth. And you, in this your latest book, you talk about the Galactic Federation of Light, kind of like doing the same thing with the progression of humanity. So you want to talk about what is the Galactic Federation of Light that you were told about by your clients?
So according to my clients, the Galactic Federation is like a big group of everyone, of all these beings throughout the universe, with the sole mission of unity consciousness and to protect the universe. It's almost like a police force, to make sure that nobody's going to invade us and take over us, because this Earth and all the humans on it are so important to this experiment. Everything is watching us, everything is us. And so we're almost like the like human version of these extraterrestrials on the ground. And so they're monitoring, making sure no one's going to take or ruin this experiment, basically, if that makes sense.
So I just wanted to kind of get you to elaborate on the idea of unity consciousness, because it's mentioned in the book, and of course it's being taught. So is unity consciousness a good thing? I mean, we all assume it is, and certainly I have been kind of like doing my own bit to develop that, but I'm wondering if unity consciousness is possible in a 3D polarity world as opposed to like a 5D polarity world.
It's not really. Everything, like all of consciousness has an agenda, apparently, and the agenda is unity consciousness. So we're moving up in our frequency in order to achieve this agenda. And it's not like everyone's going to be one. We're still going to have individuality, but we're going to understand ourselves on a greater level. We're going to be more in touch with each other, and there will be more oneness. Of course, we're not going to be all the way up to like the 6th dimension where we fully embrace and understand that belief that we are all one, but we will be a lot better as far as much more connection with each other. There'll be more of an understanding, because everything in this realm right now is working towards unity consciousness. They always tell me this. And so anything that's not in line with unity consciousness is experiencing a lot of friction. And it will continue like that and get worse and worse, basically. But if you're in alignment with, this concept of becoming more closer with all that is, and unity consciousness and other people and your connection with the earth, then you'll feel a lot less discomfort than, say, someone that's in a lot of friction from this idea, if that makes sense.
Okay. So I wanted to kind of talk a little bit about the Native Americans as they were kind of like interacting with the white man in that era, and having kind of recourse to other civilizations that could help them. One of the civilizations several of them you mentioned were the Little People and the Sasquatch, that they offered to help the Native Americans deal with the white man problem. So you want to kind of like just talk about those two groups and how they were part of that series of events.
Yeah, so interesting. So I had never heard of the Little People before, but Anawaya called this group the Nunahe. That's what he called them. And he said he understood that the Nunahe, the little people, came and warned the different tribes that if they didn't want to walk, that they could go underground within these mountains. And essentially, they could ascend. They didn't say it in those terms, but that's what Anawaya told me happened to many of them. So this collective or this indigenous group was so close to ascending that that dimension, if you want to call it anyway, that this was an opportunity for them. But many felt the responsibility and obligation to hold on to their stories and their legends. And they understood that if they walked, they could carry these written and oral legends with them, and that wouldn't be destroyed. And they felt that that was more important to to the people that did walk.
And the Sasquatch, I mean, what was their relationship with the Native Americans?
So the Sasquatch were like the guardians of the forest. And that was so interesting because they could come in and out of dimensions just by focusing on the air around them and using their mental abilities to come in and out. And I didn't understand that shamans had those abilities, that shamans could go in and out of dimensions also, that they learned how to do basically what Sasquatch do. I didn't really understand that. So they were just beings from a different dimension, basically, that would come in and out.
Right. So the Native Americans kind of interacted with them, knew about them. There's another group that you mentioned, which I find very, very interesting today, and that is the ant people. That the ant people did have a long-term relationship with the Native Americans, and that the ant people had helped them kind of transition from one world to the next. So you want to explain the role of the ant people in Native American traditions?
They seem to have a huge role, although Anawai had never met them or he never seen them in his lifetime, but he told me the stories about them. And basically the ant people were always helping the native tribes and the indigenous cultures. And, you know, earlier on, before Anawaya's lifetime, there were many different destructions on the earth, and sometimes the earth couldn't really come to the surface. So the ant people allowed these groups to go underground into these like system of tunnels and caves deep down within the earth, and that's where they would stay until the ant people would say it's time to come up. I mean, I know it sounds really crazy, but I've heard it from multiple clients.
So you actually say in the book that the ant people are still under our feet today and helping humanity today. So was that again from your clients?
Yes, that's from my clients. Yes, that's what they say. Yeah.
Well, I found that really very important because I'm currently working with someone who's part of the US Army. He's active duty. His name is JP. That's a pseudonym I use for him because he's active, and so I don't want to reveal who he is, otherwise he'd lose his job. He says in the last few months that he's been on several missions with on behalf of this US Space Command into these underground cavern systems in Florida, where he's met representatives of the ant people, and that they have ancient technologies, that they have a tree of life down there. They have these powers of waters that rejuvenate, and that he actually got to meet one of the kings of the ant people that's in control of one of these large cavern systems in a certain area. So I thought that was very significant that your information dovetails or supports that.
Wow. Where is this water? I want to go there.
It's there's a number of places in Florida and with natural springs, and but deep underground. I mean, in the underground cavern, where you have to travel quite some distance to get there. There is an underground water system, and he calls it the tree of life, which is kind of described in various cultures. I'm pretty sure, well, I guess, did you come across that in Native American traditions, them talking about a tree of life?
Well, I was just thinking that I've been to one of the springs and there was this really crystal clear water. And that if you dove down, you could go into a cave that would just keep going down and no one knew how far deep it went. So I don't know. Yeah, they would talk about all these different symbols and how the symbols had power, and basically all the symbols from the Star People and even carried through the Native Americans are holographic keys. So all you have to do is just look at it and it's downloading information within your mind. Just like crop circles or any of this sacred geometry actually does something to the brain. When you look at it, it's carrying messages and carrying wisdom. And same with the tree of life. All you have to do is look at it and it will, download this information.
Now, one of the topics that you address in the book is the Native Americans collecting the missing soul pieces. So can you explain exactly how that happens? How do people miss soul pieces, and how did the Native Americans go about reconnecting that?
Well, it's so interesting because many people have a piece of their soul that's stuck. So you know how you hear about earthbound spirits? A lot of times, I mean, not a lot of times, but it happens to us a lot when there's a lot of trauma and a part of us stays stuck. And it's stuck until another part of its soul helps it gain that peace back. I mean, it's really interesting. So a lot of us have stuck pieces, like from Atlantis or, traumatic events like walking the Trail of Tears. And all it takes is just hearing the information or reading the information for something to trigger within your mind and to get that piece to go back to connect with the rest of itself. But that's basically how the universe works anyway. It's always sending us clues in order to get what it is that we need. But Anawaya was describing that many people have these missing soul pieces because of the trauma that really, right now especially, we're starting to remember these things so that we can get these soul pieces back, which I thought was interesting.
So how would that work? I mean, we talked earlier about parallel kind of like timelines. So if, for example, you're here today but you also had a life in Atlantis or a life on the Trail of Tears and you suffered a trauma there, and so you're going through some trauma there, and so is recovering that soul fragment all about somehow kind of reconnecting your soul consciousness between your life here with the life that was lived, or that past you that parallel you that's going through some trauma, whether it's Atlantis, whether it's Lemuria, whether it's the Trail of Tears?
Oh, definitely. And how it usually works is maybe you're a person that gets really triggered by something. Maybe it's like a tidal wave or something like that. For some reason, when you hear about this or you see something like this, it triggers you so deeply that there's something more to it. You don't have to remember this memory. All you have to do is feel into it, and just feel into it and try to follow that feeling as deep as you can. And that's really all you need to do. When you feel a release, then you know that soul piece has come back almost. When you stop being triggered by it in the same way, you know that you healed something, but you don't have to consciously remember it in order to experience that type of trauma. And I know that's why they want me to write these books. I mean, they've told me, so they want this information to get out and for the people that need it, because people will read it and it will connect to these soul pieces within themselves. It really doesn't take much, but you'll notice like a lightness to yourself all of a sudden, or like a reconnection kind of feeling.
Now, you mentioned in from the Trail to the Stars, the Martian evacuation, that the planet Mars went through a trauma where a civilization collapsed there, entire planetary civilization collapsed, and people came here whether it was through portal, whether it was through ships, or whether it was through the kind of death reincarnation cycle, and they brought with them their trauma. So do you want to explain
Right.
what that involved?
Oh, it seemed for the people that remember this, or whenever this comes up in a session, seems so traumatic to lose their planet, or to have been part of that destruction on Mars. And there's so many people that have past life memories of living there. And then since they couldn't live back on their planet, that was really difficult. They had to come almost like through a portal and relearn how to live on Earth. And one thing that was not really filtered out very well was a lot of the beings from Mars carried with them a lot of aggression. And there wasn't any way, since they needed a new planet, there wasn't any way to really fully filter out all this other stuff that came from these beings that had to find a new place to live from Mars. But it just seemed so terrible. And what was interesting is that it was so traumatic for the beings watching, that one of the extraterrestrial beings that was watching said it takes a lot of love to really watch something like this, that it was just hell on earth, that it was just so sad for a lot of these beings that came from Mars to experience the losing of their planet like this, that it was just really hard to be a part and watch this.
That's very interesting that your clients are confirming that this really did happen. That was part of Mars history, because I know that there is a CIA remote viewing experiment of Mars during the evacuation that's available on the CIA's kind of Freedom of Information Act website, where you can actually see an experiment that the CIA commissioned to find out what happened to the Martians during the evacuation. And so there you have a kind of like a document showing that the CIA was trying to find out what happened to Mars during this evacuation, that somehow it was relevant to the Earth today.
Wow. Well, my clients tell me that within Mars, there's some sort of like an obelisk, and it's like is what stores the records of the history of everything that happened with Mars, almost like our Sphinx. And it's almost like a broadcast system. So if you can tune into that, you could find out more about the history of Mars.
Well, in the book, you also discuss a number of extraterrestrial civilizations. And again, I was kind of like really struck by the similarities with what I've been learning from contactees and from kind of like historic documents and whistleblowers about some of these different extraterrestrial races. Now, for those that are kind of like typically described as very positive, the Arcturians, the Pleiadians, the Andromedans, you talk about each of these groups at length. So you want to just kind of like elaborate on these, unambiguously positive extraterrestrial groups that you've been told about by your clients.
Right. It's interesting because the more positive ones really came to understand the purpose of why they were here. And it was to really fully understand and develop the belief that they are God, basically. When a collective really fully, with no, programming, you really as a collective understand this basic truth that you are source, then you don't need to come into this experiment, and you understand everything from a much higher perspective. And a lot of these beings from, say, like Arcturians or the Pleiadians have come to understand this over the millennia. But also, it's always interesting to me because, like my clients have said, under hypnosis, time doesn't exist. So the future version or your parallel life can also be an Arcturian. So that's how or a Pleiadian or one of these races. That's always, or all of these races. That's always interesting to me, because a lot of my clients who have experienced contact or feel it was really difficult and scary, when they're under hypnosis, a lot of times they realize that it was them that was contacting them or like taking them from their bed, because there's other versions of you that are checking on you to make sure you're okay. But what was interesting to me is that there are different versions and different races And it all depends on what trajectory you're on. So if some humans, I guess, would be parallel with a typical gray extraterrestrial, and in the future they lose their planet, they don't have actual bodies anymore, and they live in a spaceship, and that's what we would look like as a human in the future. And then there's many other routes to go. And if humanity, really develops themselves spiritually and evolves our consciousness and moves forward with this trajectory, then they become more Arcturian-like. But the timelines have all been really modified. And according to my clients, we're really on this timeline of unity consciousness and the ascension, that you really can't mess up this particular timeline, because so much work has gone into this timeline. Because there have been timelines when we destroyed ourselves, and there have been timelines even from, oh man, history just seems to just be so fluid. Like it would change according to which timeline you are on. It's really interesting. But it was so fascinating to find out about these extraterrestrials, or if you want to call them extraterrestrials. It was so interesting because my clients would remember being extraterrestrial. So, I mean, if all these people have memories of being extraterrestrial, what does that say about extraterrestrials? I think it means that we are extraterrestrials. These are people's actual memories, and they don't know one another. How do they all say the same things?
Yes, I think that the whole kind of extraterrestrial human experiment is very, very critical to understand. I mean, I know we have a lot of starseeds on Earth, and this kind of leads to a really important question, which is that a lot of those that would be starseeds of the Arcturians, the Pleiadians, the Andromedans, they describe contact with these races as very kind of positive, benevolent, very respectful, where they're kind of like asked, do you want to come on our ship? Do you want to come for a trip? Do you want to work with us? Whereas those that are supposedly starseeds of the Greys or the Reptilians, you don't have that kind of like asking. It's just like, you're abducted, you're forced in, and get over your trauma, you're one of ours, and that's it. So some people say, well, the Greys and Reptilians are kind of evil, manipulative, abusive. Others say, no, these are soul contracts that people have with them to help their soul evolve. So how would you kind of like clarify all of that?
Well, I guess it really depends on your perspective on how you see these things. Because if you understand, or you think about it as if these Greys are often a different version of the person being abducted, or they're tethered to these people, or the human incarnated is actually a Grey when they go under hypnosis and they realize this, then it's a different perspective than thinking you are taken against your will, if you realize you are the one taking you oftentimes. But I'm not saying there's not negative in this reality. There's definitely negative beings and negative factions, but that's just part of this, basically just part of this experiment, because there is a law of duality when you incarnate onto this planet. So there is good and there is bad. But what happened, according to my clients, was there's this big portal in Antarctica. So when they were seeding the population in Antarctica, this negative fear virus kind of snuck itself in to Antarctica, either on the back of a ship or back of an asteroid. I'm not really sure how it got here, but it did bring in this level of fear, which negative beings feed off of. So in order to counteract that, we're all trying to release layers of our fear, because once you release a human's fear, they can't be as controlled.
Well, that's very important. I mean, in terms of like humans and control, being in charge of our own destiny, I mean, it seems that many believe, and I certainly agree with this, that a lot of our recent history has been one where we have these kind of like deep state elites that are working with or controlled by these kind of negative extraterrestrial factions, and that today, or in just very recently, the dynamic has changed with more positive groups of extraterrestrials arriving and kind of forcing the negative ones kind of back off center stage. And we have an opportunity to kind of like rise and shine and take control of our planet. So
yeah, because they can't stay with the frequency that's hitting the planet right now. It's almost like an evolution of planets. There are other Earth-like planets. And so we're in the same trajectory. And as this really high frequency is shining onto the Earth, this type of negativity can't stay on the Earth. So it's almost like a cyclical thing. So you'll start to see more and more benevolent beings as time moves on.
Okay, yeah, that's very important to know that. So you talk about star seeds returning to different extraterrestrial worlds and galaxies in the book. So, how would that happen? I mean, we are going through this transition. We're ascending, our planet is ascending into 4D, 5D, and presumably at some point, the extraterrestrials are going to show up, the benevolent ones, the negative ones have been kind of driven off. And starseeds on the Earth, maybe you, maybe I, others watching this, will be like given a choice. Do you want to stay on this 4D, 5D Earth, or do you want to come back with us to our world?
Right, because a lot of people here don't really realize that they don't usually come here. They're not here. They're only volunteers here to help raise the frequency. And once they're done their mission, they can just go back to wherever they consider their home planet or realm. And most people, or most of my clients, when they go deep under hypnosis and they see these other realms and they reconnect with their home planet, they feel such a sense of, belonging and a need, and almost like it's in their DNA to want to go back to their home planet. So they get a choice. You can stay here, or you can, go back to wherever your home planet is. It's really interesting when people see or remember their home planets, and then they realize why they liked sunsets, for instance. This happens a lot, where a client will remember going to their home planet and it's like purple and blue, and it has, pink sand, and they have like a bunch of different moons. And then they realize, oh, wow, that's, why I like sunset so much, because it reminds me of my home planet. People just feel such a strong attachment to where it is that they, spend most of their time, basically.
Well, I know one of the chapters in your book, you actually have of these clients remembering their past lives. So these are people that presumably are all star seeds, and at some point they awaken, make that reconnection with their starseed family, and they're given the choice to go back.
Once a starseed awakens, they become super powerful. It activates something within their DNA, which can also activate other people in their area. They don't have to do anything, but an awakened starseed is almost like a superpower. They can just go into a grocery store and it's activating other people's DNA without them noticing or knowing they're doing anything.
One of the things that you talked about in the book was that the extraterrestrials power their ships with crystals. I thought that was very interesting, because I mean, anyone that's watched Star Trek knows about the famous dilithium crystals that, hold all this energy that's necessary for this starship to power itself in interstellar travel. So what did your clients tell you about these crystals powering their ships?
Oh, it's just so fascinating. I mean, extraterrestrials, all different kinds of races would use crystals, even the Atlanteans, the Lemurians, and there's crystals within the Earth. And sometimes a lot of extraterrestrials would almost like go to a volcano, and I don't know how they would connect the energy from these crystals within the Earth, but it would power their ships. It would be like, it would power their ships forever, basically. I don't really understand how that technology works, but I got more information about these crystals from beings that claim to have been survivors from Lemuria, and they went to Mount Shasta. And in Mount Shasta were some of these special crystals. And they started to use these crystals and soak in that energy. And they were able to survive in this mountain without food. And in fact, soaking with these in the energy of these crystals allowed them to ascend, and they could move in and out of a different dimension. But I was trying to understand more about these crystals, and they said they're like a celestial converter. So it worked with the movement of the way the Earth moves through the Milky Way galaxy. And in this way, it would generate some kind of energy that they would use. And that's the same energy that they would power, different beings would power their ships with. I'm not really scientific, so I don't understand how it worked, but it would work in like a propulsion type situation, but I can't really describe it because I'm not mathematical.
Okay. Well, you talk about the new energies coming into Earth. One of the chapters kind of goes into depth into that. So how important is it for people to align themselves with these new energies coming into Earth?
I mean, they don't have to, but you're missing all the benefits. And it doesn't take much to start aligning yourself with the new energies. It's really just, going into any nature. You don't even have to go into nature to start understanding the different subtle energies that are coming through your environment. But I think you'd have a much more pleasant time going into nature than really trying to tune into all the energies of, say, electronics. So if you go into energy, it's just basically feeling. It's using your heart and using your skin and using your body to feel more, to feel nature, to receive this intelligence, and just understanding that you're being bombarded with information, and to develop a relationship with the Earth and with this consciousness that's growing stronger every minute. Because as our consciousness grows stronger, so is the Earth's consciousness. And it's really important if you want to understand how to use this new frequency, because it's so brand new. We don't know how to use it yet. And once these new abilities, using these subtle energies that are hitting the planet, kind of come online, we'll be able to use them more.
So in terms of the ascension of the Earth, how do you think that's going to play out over the next few years? Is it going to be something incredibly wonderful that just happens all at once? Is it going to be gradual? Are we going to emerge into some kind of like Star Trek future? What are your clients telling you about the immediate future?
Well, that's difficult because they always say soon this is happening, but soon could be like 100 years from now. But I mean, according to many clients say, there's always chaos, or there's labor pains when a woman's giving birth. They always equate it to giving birth, that, the Earth is birthing basically a new life. So it might be chaotic, it might be difficult. There's, change, a lot of change happening in order to create this beautiful new life, so to speak. But it all seems very positive. And I think it's hard to look at change in a positive way. But I think if you can just have faith and trust and know and develop your relationship with this intelligence, it'll be a smoother ride, as if you're someone that's going through a lot of chaos.
So how do people get your book, Hypnotist's Journey from the Trail to the Stars? Where do they go, and how do they get in touch with you?
You can just go to my website, theholistichuhypnotist.com, and you can buy my books off the website, or just go to Amazon. I have all my books on Amazon there.
And what do you plan to do in the future? Any new books in the pipeline?
Oh, always. Yeah, I'm already working on book 4. Super exciting. I can't wait to find out more. I'm speaking at the Conscious Life Expo in a few weeks, and then later I'm going to be on the Hidden Secrets Revealed cruise, which is going to be really fun, where I'm going to share information about the secrets of the Sphinx.
Fantastic. Well, that's one of your books that I still haven't read, and I will have to do that soon. So I want to thank you, Sarah, for coming on Exopolitics Today and sharing this incredible information that you've gained from your clients.
Oh, it's a lot of fun. Thank you so much for having me.
You have been listening to Exopolitics Today with Dr. Michael Salla. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Join or start a conversation in the comments. Take the time to explore the vast library of best-selling books, webinars, and podcasts by Dr. Sala. Visit exopoliticstoday.com.